Well, my editing skills are crap, but can the same thing be said about Left Behind, starring Nicolas Cage? Stick around and find out. Hi, I'm Peter Franson from Christian Geek Central and Spirit Play Productions with an uncut review of Left Behind, starring Nicolas Cage and Leah Thompson. The IMDb synopsis for this movie says a small group of survivors are left behind after millions of people suddenly vanish and the world is plunged into chaos and destruction. That sounds like a pretty cool premise. Maybe not a terribly creative one, but a good one. Oh, man. I'm going to cut to the chase. This is an offensively bad movie. It is a tragic shame that they had the core cast that they did in Nicolas Cage, Leah Thompson, Chad Michael Murray, who you might know from One Tree Hill, and Cassie Thompson, who she's a familiar face to me kind of, but I don't really know her from anything. But they had this really nice core cast of well-known faces and solid actors who give in this movie solid performances. But they are surrounded by just a painfully subpar experience. Man, it's such a shame. It's such a shame. I really want to fast forward 20 years from now to the interviews with Nicolas Cage and Leah Thompson, especially Nicolas Cage, where he opens up about why he did this movie. Why did it sound like a good idea to him? What passionate, I assume Christian, convinced him to be a part of this? I'm wondering, are these cast members who have these, at least two of them, especially Nicolas Cage, have these solid film careers in mainstream filmmaking. Even though Nicolas Cage is kind of doing some quirky roles and stuff, some slightly more independent stuff, he's doing what he wants to do, And I don't know if he's a believer or not. I have no idea. But I mean, I still wonder either way, just as a solid filmmaker himself, as a man who knows what's involved in making a good film, what attracted him to this? Because he brought the goods, and so did the other less than handful, I guess, of actors that were kind of featured prominently in this. But the material they had to work with and the everything else about the movie is just really rough. I made some notes here. First off, let me mention that the director, Vic Armstrong, has a long history in Hollywood involved in making some fantastic films. Some of my favorite films. The Amazing Spider-Man, Green Hornet, and like tons of others that aren't necessarily geek films, but like are well-known and, did really well and are, celebrated movies, very highly enjoyed movies. But he was a part of all those movies as a stunt coordinator. So this is his first film as a director, as far as I know, as far as IMDb knows anyway. The movie starts off with a slow start before they get to the main event, which is the disappearance of all these people. The script is just bad. It's not always terrible, and when handled by the solid actors, then it works pretty well. But it's got lots of contrived lines, some exposition lines, that are really obvious. It's got some characters that are just the supporting characters in this movie are like filled with stereotypes and there's a dramatic difference at times between the main core cast and some of the supporting cast that still have lines that are still characters in the story as opposed to just background performers, and the supporting characters are littered with some people who I would expect to see in a skit on a Sunday morning service, and I use the word skit in the most, I guess, low and demeaning way I possibly can. The most, I wouldn't call, like when we did drama ministry at our church years ago, we called them, dramas or, whatever. Even if they were comedies, we called them dramas. Skits just seemed kind of like, just light and substanceless, just kind of silly, whatever, And that's where some of these actors seem to come from is like, they just volunteered and they said, boy, I really love Jesus. I'd be happy to be a part of this movie. You're hired, Oh, man. Cast and performances. Okay, so I want to talk about Nicolas Cage, who does a great job in this movie. he can sometimes have some moments in his movies where it's like he makes weird choices, but other times, he makes bold choices that really work. And can be kind of a daring performer, and when it works for him, it really works for him, and it's unique and interesting, and he really brought the goods this movie without any weird Nicolas Cage-ness. So if that kind of normally turns you off, I don't think there's any of that going on in this movie. He just brought really a solid performance. Did not seem at all to be phoning it in. He seemed invested in the story and in his performance. So that was great. Leah Thompson, she plays Irene, a woman who just became a Christian a year ago and is, thought by the other characters who know her to be kind of like a Bible thumper, but I wouldn't describe her that way. About 80% of her performance, she came across as like a genuine, grounded person. 20%, there was just a little bit of that kind of weird, artificial, Christian mom stereotype. Just a touch of that, but not much. And so I really felt like she brought the goods as well. Chad Michael Murray, who you might know from One Tree Hill, he's a CW show, I believe, years ago, and he's kind of been a pretty boy type actor in other things in movies since then, and so he's kind of slowly growing out of that phase of his career, I think, and he did a good job in this movie. He wasn't given a lot of weighty stuff to do in his performance, but I feel like if this franchise continues, that he could potentially, do what he would need to do as a character like Buck Williams from the Left Behind books. Cassie Thompson, a face that's a little familiar to me, but I don't really know her from anything. She was possibly the standout performer in this. I really was invested in her scenes as much as I could be with the distracting, terrible elements surrounding her. She really, brought class and skill and to just quality to her scenes. So that was really well done. Let's talk about the stunts and visuals, though. Speaking of Cassie Thompson in her role as Chloe, there's one scene where she is obviously in front of a green screen. Now, I have a good eye for picking out green screen, but not only was the background looking kind of green screeny, but there were like green artifacts remaining in her hair from the green screen she was standing in front of. I was like, this is just not excusable. This is terrible. So, sorry, I can put that sign down now. Anyway, yeah, that was just a shame. There are several CG planes, at least two, I think, that have to do like crash landings in this movie, and they both look terrible. The animation looks totally unrealistic. They stop weirdly abruptly, and when they hit the ground, the physics does not look right at all. I mean, it looks like PS2, PlayStation 2 era physics. Game animation physics, but just with a nice layer of high def pasted over it. Yikes. Let's see here. The shooting style in general, I think, felt static or dated. It reminded me of, TV style shooting. Just the way that they would, what they showed in the shots and how the camera moved and stuff. So you might, if you're not kind of aware of those kinds of things, you might just watch this movie and feel like, boy, this feels like just weird, or it feels dated, or it feels just cheesy or wrong, but you can't put your finger on it. And I think it's related in part to the camera and how they use the camera in this movie. But for me, the biggest thing that dated the movie, that made it seem emotionally unrealistic or forced or whatever, was the score. A man by the name of Jack Lenz, I looked it up on IMDb, was responsible for the score in this movie. And as I was watching it, from the very beginning, it felt like the kind of score you would expect from 1990s TV drama, and I mean like on the lighter side of TV drama, at least in the conversational scenes, like Seventh Heaven type stuff. It's kind of saccharine and sweet, and it tells you too much of what you're supposed to feel in a given moment. And then during the action scenes, it's like this they use like a drum kit, like a guy on a drum set, so it's like, oh, there's danger, so ooh, there's danger, what we gonna do, and like, oh, we gotta like get into our action mode and stuff, and it feels like a 1990s cop show action sequence. I mean, it's not right. It's not right. I think that this movie would be bumped up significantly in its quality if you just removed the entire score. That might feel a little bit weird, but I would rather have this kind of grounded, independent type feel with no score at all than what they gave us in the score for Left Behind. Really disappointing there. In terms of relevance, no one's going to talk about any of the message of this movie because they're going to be talking about how bad the movie was. Nobody's going to talk about, yeah, and they're not going to talk about the rapture. They're not going to talk about Jesus. Some well-meaning Christian who just goes out to see Christian movies might see this movie and they might really be moved by it. Like anyway, I'm not going to try to stereotype that person, uh, but I think your average moviegoer is going to say, "Boy, that was terrible." I think even your Christian movie lover, your average Christian movie lover who just loves good movies and they don't only go see Christian movies, but they just love great movies, they're going to look at this. They're going to say they're going to feel embarrassed. They're going to feel ashamed. They're going to have something they care about so deeply associated with this. Man, when I was talking to my wife about this, I was just like, why did they have to tease us by getting these well-known names and faces involved in this movie and have them, have these careers that make us hope that they could be bringing enough to this movie to raise up the overall caliber of the film? Why couldn't they just cast the usual, no-name church volunteers so that we would know, okay, this movie is strictly for Christians who only watch Christian movies. The rest of us should steer clear because it's going to suck. But instead, they somehow, I have no idea how, got this small, less than a handful of really solid actors with great solid careers up to this point in Hollywood, and gave me reason to hope. Oh man, what a shame! What a shame. So I want to talk a little bit about why I think Christian movies suck. And this is speculation on my part. It's based on just some impressions that I have of my life and talking to Christians in the past, and my exposure to just kind of Christian culture, growing up in that culture myself as a Christian. I think one of the main reasons that Christian movies suck is because we don't have good teaching from the pulpit. And let me explain that. If we had better teaching from the pulpit, if in general, instead of being the exception, if in general we had teaching from the pulpit that was saying, hey, let's discern the difference between good and bad. Let's not just say, oh, that looks like it might be bad, so let's just throw it all out. And I'm talking about entertainment. I'm talking about how the church in the last, at least 20 years that I've noticed, as I've been alive, has largely, it's getting a little bit better, but has largely said, ooh, entertainment is bad. The church seems to kind of recoil from entertainment, especially the more weird and creative and interesting it might be. It's like, ooh, I don't know, that makes me uncomfortable. It's probably bad, And even if we don't say those things, out loud or like really definitively, and some people do, but many don't, there's still just kind of a feeling and an atmosphere that says, oh, rated R movies, shouldn't see those. If there's cursing or whatever, that's bad. We shouldn't see that movie. Or if there's this and this in the music, then we shouldn't listen to it or whatever. If there's this and this in video games, then then we shouldn't do it. And don't get me wrong, there is content that that we do need to avoid, that can be harmful to us, that can harm our thinking and our priorities in life. Yes, absolutely. But what we tend to do is just say, well, no, just have this gut reaction of throwing, as I said, the baby out with the bathwater. Oh man, that baby, save the baby, save the baby. We've got to save the baby. Oh my gosh. Because when we don't save that baby, then we have this generation of Christians who value Scripture, maybe not as much as they should, because if they did, they'd maybe be discerning a little bit better and not throwing the baby out with the bathwater. But we have this generation of Christians that at least, in some ways would certainly say that they value Scripture, but because they haven't been encouraged to be involved in art, be involved in creating art, be involved in experiencing art and thinking about art and pursuing art in their careers, because we have a generation of Christians that have not been encouraged in that way, then what we end up with is a much smaller group of Christians who know anything about filmmaking to choose from when movies like this get made. And movies like this are only going to be made, I think, by people who are believers, because even though it wasn't like really super strong, there was no like gospel presentation in this movie, it's still strongly enough focused on specifically Jesus, specifically Christianity, that I think like mainstream Hollywood is not going to make this kind of movie. I would find that very hard to believe if, say, the director of this movie was not a believer. So yeah. So that's what we got to do. That's what we got to do. We got to demand that our teachers, our preachers, If they're like recoiling and saying, "Oh, don't go to the theater is the place of the devil," or "Don't do this," or "Don't do that," just these broad statements about entertainment types that we should not be partaking in. I think we got to sit down and have a talk with them. Don't yell and scream and freak out, because that's not going to get us anywhere. But we've got to, even just with the people that aren't in the pulpit, but we've got to just talk to other Christians and say, "Oh, really? You think that, we shouldn't see that movie? Like a movie like Noah, or like Exodus, Gods and Kings, which is coming out this Christmas. I think Noah and Gods and Kings are likely going to be more conducive to getting to people to talk about and explore biblical ideas than this movie will, because those movies are at least well-made movies. And so people might see them, and at least we can talk about how they differ potentially from the biblical account. But people will see the movie, they'll be interested in it, they'll be interested in talking about it. The only people that are going to want to talk about this movie in a positive way and consider the themes that it's presenting are Christians, okay? And I think even that's going to be a select group of Christians. I think a lot of Christians, and certainly non-Christians, are going to say, "Yep, Christian movies still suck, moving on," and this movie is not going to spark any worthwhile conversation. So, man, it's such a disappointment. It could have been so much more. In summary, if I were talking to myself to whether or not to recommend this movie, I would say, Peter, freaking run. Run as far as you can, and hope at the same time that enough Christians go see this movie that a second one gets made. Maybe they could release this one on Blu-ray with the option to turn off the score. That would bump it up. That would make it not offensively bad. That would make it, which would be fine. I'll take over offensively bad, which I found this movie to be. Despite some really good moments from that core cast, they just couldn't rescue it. They couldn't bring it up. Man, I feel bad for them. But anyway, hope that maybe this one will make enough money, kind of like God's Not Dead somehow made a ton of money, and maybe they'll make a second one, but they'll learn from their mistakes, and they'll say, "Okay, let's release a director's cut that cuts the the score out of the first one, try to get that into people's brains as like the real start of this series, the real representation of the start of this series, and then get a whole new writing team, a whole new director, just change up the entire production staff, and maybe get the people involved." And who knows, maybe they were, for all I know. But, the people involved that make like Facing the Giants and Courageous and Fireproof and stuff like that. My wife was making the observation that I would agree with, even though I've only seen one of those movies all the way through. The rest I've just seen kind of clips and stuff. But her impression, and I would agree, of those movies is that the acting isn't that great, but the filmmaking is pretty good. It's pretty solid. It's just the performances, are kind of lacking. So I would say, yeah, get your big names and then get that production team. You get that combo together, and maybe we can move forward the reputation of Christian, quote unquote, films in Hollywood. Till then, good luck, guys, if you decide to see this one. It's rated PG-13 for some thematic elements, violence/peril, and brief drug content. I wish that some rough language would have been included in that, just on a personal level. They did stray from the source material a bit in terms of the story structure. They didn't do anything with Nikolai Carpathia or anything like that in this story. And I think it was fine for them to stray from the source material, but I wish one way they would have done that is by making people a little bit more realistic. And if you hang out with a bunch of people that are just real people, you're going to hear at least some mild swearing every now and then. You're going to hear some rough language now and then. And what you had in this movie was like some rough people who were using some suspiciously clean expressions that just did not seem to fit the personality they were trying to go for. Weird. Anyway, I gave it a quality score of 5.5 out of 10. It's a failure. It could have been lower than that. That 0.5 or maybe a whole point there I would give for what that core group of actors brings to it, but it's just not near enough to save this thing. Oh, so sad. Cut out the score, and that would bring it up maybe a 1.5 to like a 7, maybe, or 6.5 at least. And a relevance score of 5.5 out of 10. The themes are there. They're certainly noticeable, but I don't think they're going to stimulate any worthwhile thought about those themes or any worthwhile conversation about those themes because this movie is offensively bad. Anyway, there you go. Those are my thoughts on Left Behind, starring Nicolas Cage. Please do like, share, and subscribe if you want to share, and want more like this. And also, please leave comments below. So what do you think? Did you just see this movie? What did you think of it? Did you like it? Am I like totally off my rocker? Or are you like not going to touch this thing with a 10-foot pole? Or what are your thoughts on Christian movies in general? Let's keep it civil if we can. Finally, where's my sign? Here it is. Goodbye! Oh, if you want info about that scoring system, that quality relevant stuff, and tons of other content and community, visit ChristianGeekCentral.com. I hope you'll come and join us there soon as we continue to geek out and seek the truth. Oh, yeah, I gotta click stop because I'm not editing this.